He was a former SWAT officer who drove across America to outrun his past. A man searching for peace with only his loyal K9 by his side. But one stormy night, at a forgotten gas station in the middle of nowhere, he saw a silent cry for help, a frightened little girl trapped in the back of a black SUV. Within seconds, instinct replaced hesitation, and the road became a battleground once more. Because sometimes, God doesn't send angels. He sends warriors who've already been through hell. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain came in sheets, slanting sideways under the cold Wyoming wind. It was close to midnight, and the highway stretched endlessly in both directions, glistening under the orange glow of scattered streetlights. Ethan Cole guided his old gray pickup toward a lonely gas station perched on the edge of the road, a forgotten outpost surrounded by fields of wet grass and trembling pine silhouettes. The sign above the roof flickered weakly. Gas and diner, open all night. Ethan, a man in his late 30s, stepped out of the truck, boots sinking slightly into the puddled ground. He was tall, built from years of discipline and training, his jawline rugged, his beard trimmed close but uneven. There was a kind of tired nobility in his eyes, gray, steady, observant. The eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world and learned to stay quiet about it. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow, not dramatic, but enough to hint at a life once lived in the line of danger. His black tactical jacket bore the marks of road dust and long miles. On the passenger seat, a German shepherd lifted its head. Shadow. 8 years old, disciplined, powerful yet gentle. The kind of dog that had learned to read human silence better than words. His coat was a deep steel gray fading into beige along the muzzle. The right ear had a small notch from an old injury, and the dark eyes carried the same quiet wisdom as his handlers. Shadow had once served with Ethan during his SWAT days, trained for search and rescue and high-risk entry operations. They'd saved lives together, but they'd also lost friends, human and canine alike. Since retirement, Ethan had taken Shadow with him on this self-imposed journey across America, hoping, perhaps, to outrun memories that no longer faded. The hum of the rain filled the silence as Ethan clicked the nozzle into the tank. The smell of gasoline mixed with wet asphalt and pine. Inside the truck, the radio crackled softly. Amber Alert remains active. 8-year-old girl, Lily Bennett, missing since Friday evening. Authorities believe she may have been taken by 2 adult males traveling in a dark-colored SUV, possibly heading west on Route 14. Ethan froze, eyes narrowing. He turned his head toward the highway, his instincts sharpening like a blade unsheathed. Shadow's ears perked. "You hear that, buddy?" he murmured, voice low and gravelly. "Route 14, that's us." The radio went silent again, replaced by the faint hiss of static. For a moment, all Ethan could hear was the rain tapping the metal roof of the gas station like restless fingers. He remembered the last mission before he left SWAT, how a failed rescue had left a young hostage dead, and how the guilt had eaten at him like acid. That memory had followed him through every night drive, every lonely diner stop. He exhaled slowly, shaking the thought away. "We're just passing through," he whispered to himself. But fate had other plans. A dull engine hum caught his attention. Parked under the dim light near the edge of the lot was a black SUV, mud-streaked, windows tinted, idling but unmoving. The kind of car people forget to notice until it's too late. Ethan's eyes instinctively assessed. The rear tires were heavy with weight, one headlight slightly misaligned, plates from out of state. Through the rain-smeared windshield, he caught a flicker of movement inside. At first, he thought it was nothing. Then he saw her. In the back seat, A little girl sat very still. Her hair was golden, tied loosely in a messy ponytail, and she wore a pink jacket with a rabbit patch on the sleeve. Her face, pale under the yellowed light, pressed lightly against the window. She looked out. Not the way a child looks curiously at strangers, but the way a prisoner studies the horizon. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound reached him. Then her small hand lifted. She pressed her thumb into her palm, folded her fingers over it, held it for a second, then let it go. Ethan's pulse stopped. The signal. The silent cry for help. He had been trained to recognize it, used by victims of abuse or abduction to wordlessly ask for rescue. Shadow gave a low growl, sensing the sudden shift in his handler's breathing. Ethan looked around the gas station. The attendant was inside, a young man in his 20s, scrolling through his phone, unaware. The rain made the world feel closed off, isolated. The SUV idled still, exhaust curling like ghostly mist into the night. A man sat in the driver's seat, his face half lit by the glow of a dashboard screen. Stocky build, unshaven, wearing a trucker cap. Next to him, another figure leaned forward, speaking low, the kind of conversation that belonged to men planning something they shouldn't. Ethan's instincts screamed. Every fiber of training, every dormant reflex came alive. But he knew the first rule. Don't act without reading the field. He slid his hand down to his belt, checking the concealed holster where his old Sig Sauer rested. He hadn't drawn it in months, not since leaving the force. "Easy," he muttered. Shadow's gaze followed his. The girl inside the SUV shifted, glancing towards the front seat. One of the men turned to look at her, and she immediately froze, shrinking back. Ethan's heart clenched. He knew that look, the small, rehearsed fear of someone who had already been hurt before. The man said something sharp, and the girl nodded quickly, eyes down. The SUV door opened briefly as one of the men stepped out, lighting a cigarette under the rain's edge, the glow illuminating his face. Mid-40s, sharp nose, a faded tattoo along the neck, hands scarred. He exhaled smoke and scanned the lot with predatory calm. Ethan turned away before their eyes could meet. He walked toward the convenience store, every step calculated. The attendant barely looked up when Ethan entered. The bell above the door chimed softly. "Evening," Ethan said, his tone level. "Hey, man," the clerk mumbled, chewing gum. "Rough night, huh?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, taking a coffee cup from the counter. "Listen, you got a landline here? Phone signal's bad." "Yeah, behind the counter, why?" "Might want to call 911. The clerk blinked, confused. "What for?" Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice barely audible. "Because that SUV out there fits the Amber Alert. 2 males. Little girl, don't look now." The boy paled, setting the phone down shakily. "You sure?" Ethan's gaze hardened. "I don't guess about this kind of thing." He slipped a few bills on the counter. "Call it in." Quietly. As he stepped back outside, the storm intensified, wind howling across the open road. The SUV's brake lights flared briefly, then dimmed. The driver checked his mirrors, suspicious. Ethan pretended to sip his coffee, moving slowly toward his truck, mind racing through tactical calculations, distance, line of sight, number of exits. Shadow's ears were flat, muscles tensed. The girl's silhouette moved again. She was watching him. Their eyes met through the wet glass, hers pleading, his resolute. Then she repeated the signal. Thumb, palm, fingers closed. 1 heartbeat. 2. The man in the driver's seat turned suddenly, following her gaze. Ethan looked away, ducking behind his truck door just as headlights from a passing semi flooded the station. The timing saved him. The SUV's engine growled. It stayed put, but now he knew they had noticed him. Rain lashed harder, the world narrowing into the small circle of light from the gas station. Ethan whispered, "Stay ready, Shadow." The dog lowered himself beside the truck tire, muscles coiled. Ethan's hand hovered near his jacket pocket, where his phone blinked weakly. No signal. He looked back once more. The little girl's face was barely visible now, just a pale blur behind fogged glass. But the meaning lingered, burning into his mind like an echo he could never unhear. The signal for help. The plea for salvation. And as thunder rolled across the Wyoming plains, Ethan Cole understood one thing with painful clarity. Whatever road he thought he was on, it had just changed direction. Forever. The wind howled low against the glass doors of the convenience store, the kind of sound that made even neon lights flicker uncertainly. Ethan stood by the coffee machine, his reflection glinting off the chrome dispenser as he poured black coffee into a paper cup. His pulse was steady, but the quiet tension in his shoulders betrayed the trained readiness of a man used to reading danger before it happened. He stirred the coffee absently, eyes flicking toward the window where the rain-smeared outline of the black SUV remained parked under the buzzing lamp. Behind the counter, the young clerk, whose name tag read Kyle, fumbled nervously with the landline phone. Kyle couldn't have been older than 22, with sandy brown hair falling over his forehead and acne scars along his jawline. He wore the bored expression of someone who had worked too many night shifts, but now his hands trembled as he dialed, glancing between Ethan and the window. It's ringing," he whispered. "You sure about this, man?" Ethan's voice was low but calm. "I'm sure. Keep your eyes down. Don't make them notice you." He placed a few more bills on the counter, masking his instructions beneath the motion of paying. Then he turned and pushed the door open, the bell chiming faintly. Outside, the storm had thickened. The SUV's taillights cast two red ghosts onto the wet pavement. Ethan walked slowly back toward his truck, coffee in hand, pretending to check his fuel gauge. His eyes darted to the far corner of the lot where the man with the cigarette, the tattooed one, had stubbed it out and was now pacing near the car's rear bumper. His movements were clipped and agitated, the kind of restlessness that belonged to men running out of time. Inside the SUV, the little girl was gone from view. The tinted windows made it impossible to see clearly, but Ethan caught a faint outline, her head lowered, hands perhaps tied or held. His stomach tightened. Shadow, from inside the pickup, gave a faint growl, eyes trained on the SUV like a soldier awaiting a command. Ethan's mind worked through the angles. The rain made everything slick and distorted, headlights reflecting like broken mirrors. If he intervened now, he'd risk spooking them. If he waited too long, they'd vanish into the storm. Then the passenger door of the SUV opened, and the second man stepped out. He was taller than the first, lanky but wiry, with sunken cheeks and a long nose that gave him a hawkish look. His hair was greasy, dark, stuck to his forehead from the humidity. The man wore a brown bomber jacket with a torn patch on the sleeve. Ethan noted the way he kept touching his ribs. Perhaps an old injury or nervous tic. The two exchanged sharp words over the sound of the rain, voices muffled but tense. The taller man looked around the lot, eyes darting like a cornered animal. His gaze swept across Ethan's truck for a moment, lingered, then moved on. Too close, Ethan thought, jaw tightening. He turned slightly to look casual, raising his cup for a sip, though his finger hovered near the pistol grip inside his jacket pocket. A distant rumble of thunder rolled through the valley, echoing like cannon fire. The men flinched instinctively, and in that instant Ethan noticed something. The SUV's rear license plate hung slightly crooked, covered in a thin layer of mud deliberately smeared to obscure the numbers. His suspicion hardened into certainty. He took a slow step backward, pretending to head for the restroom area behind the station, but really to circle around the opposite side of the SUV. He needed a better view. Shadow, still in the truck, watched his every move, head low, eyes alert. That was when a faint cry pierced through the storm. A single muffled sob. Ethan froze. It came from inside the SUV. The sound was brief, instantly drowned by the wind, but it was enough. He crouched slightly beside a trash bin, pretending to tie his boot. From that angle he could see the girl again. Lily. Her small hands trembled against the glass as she shifted, and for a split second, her eyes met his through the reflection of the gas station light. Desperation. Terror. Trust. She mouthed something he could barely decipher, but he thought he read the word, please. The taller man turned suddenly, and Ethan forced himself to straighten and move naturally toward the pickup. The SUV's engine revved once, the driver inside glancing at his mirror, suspicious. The rain muffled everything but the faint vibration of tires over wet gravel. Ethan reached the pickup, slid into the seat, and exhaled slowly. "Shadow," he said quietly, "we might have one chance." The dog tilted his head slightly, ears forward, waiting. He glanced at the store. Kyle was still on the phone, eyes wide, mouthing something. Then Ethan saw the problem. He wasn't talking to anyone. The line was dead. The storm had taken down the connection. The SUV headlights flashed once, and Ethan realized they were preparing to leave. "Damn it!" he muttered, starting his truck's engine just enough to get power, but not light. He couldn't let them vanish. He reached for his phone, but there was still no signal. The rain hammered harder, isolating the small gas station from the world. Suddenly, the taller man yanked open the back door of the SUV and barked something inside. The girl flinched, shrinking away. The man's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder roughly. Ethan's chest burned. He'd seen too many men like that during raids, men who thrived on control, who found power in fear. Ethan knew he couldn't wait. He grabbed his jacket, zipped it halfway, and stepped back into the storm. He approached slowly from the side, posture relaxed, but voice firm. "Everything all right here?" he called out, loud enough to be heard but not threatening. Both men turned. The shorter one, the tattooed smoker, sneered, water dripping, off the brim of his cap. "Mind your business, pal. We're fine." Ethan stopped 5 feet away, rain pouring off his shoulders. "Kid looks cold. Storm's getting worse. You sure you want to drive?" The tall man's lip curled. "You some kind of cop?" Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed sharp. "Used to be." That made them pause. The air thickened with tension. The tattooed man shifted slightly, his right hand slipping toward his waistband. Ethan saw the movement immediately. "Don't," he said softly. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. The kind of tone that came from experience, not threat. For a moment, no one moved. The rain clattered on metal, on skin, on everything between. Then the sound of an approaching engine broke through the standstill, a car pulling into the lot from the highway. The two men exchanged glances. The tattooed one cursed under his breath. Without another word, they shoved the girl back into the car and slammed the doors. The SUV roared to life, tires spinning water behind them as it sped toward the road. Ethan sprinted back to his truck, throwing the door open. "Go!" he barked. Shadow leapt to the passenger seat, bracing himself as Ethan hit the ignition. The old pickup groaned, headlights cutting through the rain. He caught a glimpse of the SUV's taillights vanishing into the dark road ahead. "Not tonight," he muttered. He slammed the gear shift forward and tore after them, the roar of thunder chasing them both into the black Wyoming night. The highway had turned into a mirror of rain, swallowing all color but silver and shadow. The gas station was now a blur behind Ethan's rear-view mirror, its neon light shrinking into the storm's throat. The black SUV sliced through the night ahead, its taillights blinking like two distant embers. Ethan's old pickup shook under the force of the wind, wipers scraping uselessly across the windshield. He leaned forward, eyes narrow, focused, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Beside him, Shadow braced against the seat, claws gripping the floor mat, gaze fixed through the glass. The German shepherd's coat glistened with the dim reflection of lightning, muscles taut, silent as a predator ready to spring. Ethan knew this kind of pursuit too well, the rhythm of adrenaline balanced against cold logic. Every second mattered. He couldn't get too close. One wrong move, and the bastards might hurt the girl. "Stay with me, Shadow," he muttered. The dog gave a soft, affirming whine. Up ahead, the SUV swerved sharply, taking an unexpected turn onto a dirt service road that disappeared into the forest. Ethan slowed. Headlights dimmed. The road was narrow, lined with wet pine and mud, leading deeper into darkness. He followed at a distance, careful not to reveal himself. The sound of gravel under his tires was lost under the thunder. After a few miles, the SUV slowed near a small clearing. Ethan killed his engine and rolled silently behind a cluster of trees, the rain masking his presence. He watched as the passenger door opened. The shorter man, the one with the neck tattoo, stepped out, dragging Lily by the wrist. Her pink jacket was soaked, her hair plastered to her forehead. She stumbled, bare feet sinking into the mud. "Hurry up," the man barked, his voice cutting through the rain like gravel. "You want to get sick? Move!" Ethan's chest burned. He could feel the old training ignite within him, the kind of cold precision he'd buried long ago. The tall man stayed in the driver's seat, engine idling, eyes scanning the tree line nervously. He muttered something, and the tattooed man snapped back, "Relax, it's just rain." But it wasn't just rain. It was cover. Ethan eased his door open. The air outside was freezing, filled with the scent of pine and fuel. He crouched low, his boots sinking into wet leaves, and gave Shadow a silent hand signal. "Stay low. Follow." The dog slipped out, barely a sound, blending with the night. He crept closer, the pounding rain hiding his steps. He could see Lily now, shivering, small, eyes wide as she glanced toward the tree line. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. Ethan lifted one finger to his lips, the universal sign of silence. She froze but didn't look away. That spark of recognition, a trust, fragile but real, passed between them. The tattooed man turned suddenly, scanning the dark. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered but a bit soft around the middle. The kind of build that came from years of violence followed by too much beer and regret. His face was coarse, jaw lined with stubble, eyes sunken yet alert. The eyes of someone who'd done bad things and stopped pretending to be sorry. There was something hollow in the way he carried himself, like a man running from debts that weren't just money. He spat to the side and muttered, "Get back in the car," yanking Lily's arm. She whimpered. And that was enough. Ethan moved. The crunch of his boot against the gravel made the man's head snap around. "Who's there?" Ethan stepped into the open, rain cascading down his shoulders. "You're scaring the kid," he said evenly, voice calm but low. "Let her go. There's no need to make this worse." The man blinked, startled, then scowled. "You again? The hero from the station?" His hand moved toward his waistband. Ethan's tone didn't change. "You really want to try that in this weather? Think hard." The man hesitated. The tall one inside the SUV shouted, "What's going on?" "Just some nosy bastard," the tattooed man yelled back, then spat again. "Go back to your car, stranger. You got no idea what this is." "Oh, I do," Ethan replied. "Two men, wrong plates, frightened child. You think I didn't notice?" For a second, the tattooed man's expression shifted, from anger to something colder, a smirk. "You a cop?" Ethan met his stare. "Used to be." The man's smirk vanished. He lunged forward, fist swinging, a flash of metal glinting in his other hand. Ethan sidestepped, caught his arm, twisted, and the knife clattered to the ground. The man grunted in pain, his knees hitting the mud. Before he could recover, Shadow darted from the darkness, growling, snapping his teeth just inches from the man's throat. The sound froze the world. "Easy," Ethan commanded softly. Shadow stopped, lips curled, waiting. The tall man in the SUV panicked, shoving the door open. Lightning illuminated his gaunt face, sweat mixing with rain. "Let him go!" he shouted, pulling a pistol from the glove compartment. His hands trembled as he aimed, eyes wide. Ethan pushed the tattooed man aside and dove behind a fallen log as a shot cracked through the storm. Bark exploded beside him. Shadow darted away, circling. Ethan's mind ran calculations, distance, angle, visibility. He shouted over the rain, "You fire again and you'll hit the girl!" The driver froze, gun still shaking. Lily had dropped to her knees beside the SUV, crying. Then another voice joined the chaos. A woman's voice, shouting from deeper down the road, "Stop! Police!" All eyes turned. A patrol car's lights flashed faintly in the distance, distorted through sheets of rain. The tall man cursed, grabbed Lily roughly, and hauled her toward the SUV. Ethan sprang from cover, slamming into him before he could close the door. The gun fell, disappearing into the mud. The two men grappled, fists and elbows crashing in the dark. Ethan's strength wasn't raw anymore, but it was disciplined, measured. He caught the man's arm, twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. "Shadow, watch him!" The dog pinned the tattooed man, growling low. The other man writhed beneath Ethan, gasping. From behind, the faint beam of a flashlight approached. A state trooper emerged, rain slicking down his poncho. He was middle-aged, lean, with a kind but weathered face, the kind that belonged to men who'd spent half their lives on night duty. The silver badge on his chest reflected the stormlight. "What the hell's happening here?" he demanded, voice booming over the rain. Ethan lifted his hands slightly. "Kidnapping. Girl's safe." The trooper's name tag read Sergeant Mark Riley. He moved fast, professional, cuffing the tall man while radioing in coordinates. "Dispatch, this is Unit 27. 2 suspects in custody. 1 minor recovered. Repeat, we've got the girl." Lily clung to Shadow's neck, trembling but alive. Ethan exhaled deeply, exhaustion settling into his bones. Mark looked at him curiously. "You ex-military?" "SWAT," Ethan said, wiping rain from his brow. "Retired." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Well, you picked a hell of a night to play hero." Ethan glanced at Lily, who was watching him with wide, tearful eyes. "Didn't have a choice." Behind them, lightning lit up the cabin deeper in the woods, a dark silhouette with faint movement inside. Ethan's gaze hardened. "They weren't acting alone," he said quietly. Mark followed his eyes, his face tensing. "You sure?" "Positive," Ethan replied. "And whoever's in that cabin, he's expecting them." The sergeant looked toward the tree line, rain pounding on his hat brim. "Then we better call backup." But even as he said it, the radio hissed with static again, cut off by the storm. Ethan felt the same sinking certainty as before. No backup would reach them in time. And in that silence, the trap was only beginning. The night had swallowed the road whole. Rain lashed the windshield in furious streaks as Ethan gripped the steering wheel. the old pickup growling like an animal straining against the storm. The SUV's red taillights flickered ahead, barely visible through the downpour. Mud splattered the sides of his truck as he pushed harder on the accelerator. Shadow stood braced on the passenger seat, muscles tense, his fur wet and gleaming in flashes of lightning. His eyes, amber and sharp, never left the road ahead. Ethan could feel the pulse of adrenaline pounding in his ears, each beat syncing with the rhythmic slap of wipers. He muttered, half to himself, half to his canine partner, "We can't lose them now." He tapped a small black device clipped under his dash. A field locator, one of the few remnants from his SWAT days. It wasn't high-tech anymore, but it still worked when phones didn't. A blinking green dot marked his position. Another flickered weakly in front, the SUV's signal bouncing faintly through GPS reflection. Ethan hit the transmitter, sending an emergency ping to the nearest police frequency. Static responded. The storm had drowned the signal again. "Come on," he hissed, tapping the radio, but nothing answered except the roar of rain. Ahead, the SUV swerved left, tires skidding dangerously before regaining traction. Its driver was panicking, Ethan could tell. The erratic braking, the sudden accelerations, all signs of a man losing control. Ethan had chased plenty of men like that in his career. The desperate ones always made mistakes. He eased his foot just slightly off the gas, keeping distance. "Let them think we're farther back," he murmured. Shadow gave a low rumble of agreement, a quiet growl that vibrated through the cabin. The road twisted into the woods, tall pines bending under the weight of the wind. Water streamed down the slopes like silver veins. The tires hissed against the wet gravel as Ethan followed. In the distance, a narrow wooden bridge came into view, its old planks glistening under the lightning's flash. Ethan recognized it. It led toward the northern ridge, an area of abandoned logging sites and hunting cabins. No patrol routes there, perfect for men with something to hide. The SUV hit the bridge first. One of its headlights was shattered from the earlier struggle, making it look like a one-eyed beast cutting through the fog. As it crossed, Ethan saw it fishtail slightly, the rear end sliding out before regaining balance. When his own tires hit the slick planks seconds later, the whole pickup shuddered. He tightened his grip, fighting the steering wheel. Shadow steadied himself, paws wide, head low. Once across, the forest seemed to close around them, dense, suffocating. The taillights up ahead vanished for a moment. Ethan slowed, scanning the darkness. Where the hell? Then he saw it, the faint glimmer of red light turning sharply onto a dirt trail that curved up into the mountains. He cursed under his breath. "They're heading for higher ground." He flipped a switch on his dashboard, activating a pair of auxiliary fog lights mounted on his grille. The beams cut through the mist, revealing the trail ahead, narrow, uneven, and slick with runoff. He downshifted, the engine growling deeper, then followed. Inside the SUV, Lily sat silent between the two men. Her small face was ghostly in the flickering dashboard glow, eyes wide but uncrying. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, a tattered gray thing with one ear missing, like a lifeline. The driver barked orders to the man beside him, panic cracking his voice. "You said the cabin was empty." "It is," the passenger snapped back. "But if that guy keeps following, then we'll deal with him." Lily squeezed the rabbit tighter. She could hear the faint sound of another engine behind them. Steady, relentless. The man in the passenger seat turned, looking through the rain-streaked rear window, and saw headlights cutting through the mist. "He's still there. He's still on us." Back in the pickup, Ethan saw the flash of movement as the SUV's brake lights flared suddenly. "They're going to try something stupid," he muttered. He was right. The SUV skidded sideways across the trail, blocking the narrow path. Before Ethan could stop, the driver's door burst open, and the tattooed man stepped out with a shotgun. "Down!" Ethan shouted. Shadow ducked as a blast shattered through the night, pellets raining across the truck's hood. Ethan swerved hard, the truck fishtailing before sliding behind a mound of wet earth. Steam rose from the barrel of the shotgun as the man racked another shell, laughing through the rain. Ethan grabbed the sidearm from his thigh holster. His hands were steady, breath slow. "Stay," he told Shadow. The dog's body was trembling with restrained energy, eyes burning with instinct to charge. "Not yet," Ethan whispered. Another shot boomed, this time splintering a nearby tree. Ethan counted the rhythm. 1, 2, rack, pause. Then he moved. He rolled from behind the truck and fired twice, not to kill, but to distract. Bullets sparked off metal near the SUV's rear bumper. The tattooed man ducked, shouting curses. Ethan darted to the side, using the terrain's incline for cover. He could see Lily through the shattered rear window. Terrified, small, her lips forming silent cries. The driver screamed, "Forget it! Get in! Go!" The tattooed man fired once more, then dove back into the SUV. The vehicle spun its wheels, mud spraying high as it lunged forward again, nearly clipping Ethan's fender. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding the impact. Shadow barked sharply, his restraint finally snapping. At Ethan's signal, the dog leapt from the truck bed, landing squarely in the mud, sprinting after the SUV. Rain pounded against his fur as he ran, muscles coiled like steel springs. Ethan jumped, back behind the wheel, gunning the engine. "Hang on, Shadow," he breathed. The chase resumed, fiercer than before. The SUV struggled up the incline, slipping in the mud. Ethan followed close enough to see the exhaust flare. He reached for his side radio, miraculously catching a brief flicker of signal. A woman's voice, faint but clear, broke through the static. "This is Trooper Riley, reporting position North Ridge, heavy storm. Riley, it's Cole," Ethan shouted into the mic. "I've got the suspects heading toward the old mining road. The girl's still with them." Static crackled. Then the faint reply came. "Copy that. Backup's en route. 20 minutes out. Be careful, Cole." "Not sure I've got 20 minutes, he muttered, shoving the mic aside. Lightning illuminated the world again, revealing a fork in the road ahead. The SUV veered right, up toward a ridge of jagged rock. Ethan followed, tires slipping dangerously close to the edge. Far below, a black river glinted with lightning flashes. The storm had turned into a living thing, thrashing around them, every sound amplified. The engines, the rain, the thunder, and the labored breathing of men and machine locked in chase. Then, abruptly, the SUV's taillights vanished. Ethan slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt. He leaned forward, scanning. Where? Then he saw it. Deep tire tracks veering off the road into a side trail half covered by branches. Smart. They'd killed the lights and tried to hide. Ethan killed his own headlights, plunging the world into darkness. Only the faint glow of lightning through clouds lit his path. He whispered to Shadow, "You smell them, boy?" The dog sniffed the air, low growl building in his throat, then looked toward the hidden path. Ethan nodded. "Good boy." He drove slowly forward, keeping the truck silent, the engine barely idling. The forest thickened until the road disappeared entirely. Then, through the mist, a faint orange glow appeared. A cabin's light. Ethan's pulse quickened. That's where they're taking her. He parked behind a fallen tree, engine off. The SUV sat outside the cabin, empty doors swinging in the wind. Ethan checked his weapon, whispered, "Let's finish this." Shadow's ears flattened, ready. Together they slipped into the rain-soaked darkness, heading toward the faint light and the nightmare waiting inside. The forest breathed like a living thing, each gust of wind moving through the pines like a low growl, each branch creaking like bones under weight. Rain drummed on the earth in a slow, relentless rhythm. Ethan crouched behind a fallen tree, his clothes soaked through, breath visible in the cold night air. Ahead of him stood the cabin, a sagging wooden structure half swallowed by vines and fog, its single porch light flickering weakly. The SUV sat in front, engine still running, steam curling from its hood. The faint yellow glow from inside revealed silhouettes moving back and forth. Ethan's pulse steadied as his training took over. This was no longer a chase. It was an operation. He touched Shadow's flank and pointed left. "Circle wide," he whispered. The dog's muscles shifted beneath his hand. A silent nod. Then Shadow vanished into the dark, his fur blending with the forest floor. Ethan drew his Sig Sauer from its holster and checked the magazine by touch. Full. He inhaled slowly, the scent of pine resin mixing with oil and mud. Every detail of the night sharpened. The dripping of rain from the eaves, the muted rumble of the SUV's engine, the distant thunder rolling like artillery. Through a broken window he could make out the driver, the shorter man, pacing near the table. He had stripped off his wet jacket, revealing tattooed forearms and a belly scar that looked like an old knife wound. He was talking to someone on a satellite phone. His tone was impatient, scared. "Yeah, we've got her, but the guy's still following. I told you we should have waited till morning." A pause. His voice dropped. "I said, we'll be gone by dawn. Just have the money ready." A second figure emerged from the back room, a man Ethan hadn't seen before. He was older, maybe in his 50s, tall and lean, with a hawk-like nose and silver hair slicked back tight. His clothes were clean despite the storm, a black coat buttoned to the throat, gloves on his hands. He carried himself with eerie composure, as if the chaos outside couldn't touch him. When he spoke, his voice was deep and smooth, almost polite. "You let him follow you this far? Amateur work?" The driver scowled. "We lost him, I swear." The older man didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing, assessing. His face was angular, the kind that belonged to someone used to commanding fear. There was no warmth in his gaze, only calculation. "He's not police," he said finally. "He's something else. But no matter. Finish loading the girl. I'll handle the rest." Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just a buyer. He was orchestrating something larger. He glanced toward the SUV. The back door was open, and through the rain he saw Lily sitting inside, wrists bound with duct tape, head bowed. She was shaking, though not from the cold. Her little stuffed rabbit lay forgotten in the mud near her. Feet. Ethan crawled closer, using the storm's roar as cover. His boots sank into the soaked soil with each step. He could hear Shadow's faint movement through the trees. Patient, silent, waiting for the signal. Inside, the older man, whom the others called Mr. Hale, lit a cigarette with deliberate calm. The flame illuminated his sharp cheekbones and the faint scar running from his ear to his jawline. He exhaled smoke through his nose, voice low. "You two can't even manage a handoff without drawing attention. Do you have any idea who we're dealing with?" The driver hesitated. "It's just one guy and a dog." "Just one guy," Hale repeated with a mirthless smile. "That's how they always underestimate the right kind of man." Ethan took that moment. He whistled once, a soft, nearly imperceptible tone. From the shadows, Shadow burst forth, a streak of gray fur and muscle. The driver barely had time to turn before the dog hit him full force, knocking him off his feet. The gun in his hand flew across the room, clattering on the floor. Shadow growled, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. Panic erupted. Ethan moved fast, kicking open the side door. Wood splintered under his boot. Mr. Hale turned sharply, his calm replaced by something colder. Ethan entered low and fast, weapon raised. "Step away from the girl," he shouted. The tall man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Ethan with unnerving calm. "SWAT, I presume," he said quietly. "You've got that look. Tired eyes, but still trying to save the world." Ethan kept the gun steady. "Hands where I can see them." "Do you know what she's worth?" Hale asked, nodding toward Lily. "There are people who'd burn half the country for what's in her father's accounts. You're interfering in business you don't understand." Ethan didn't blink. "And you're breathing air you don't deserve." Hale smiled faintly and moved his hand. Too fast. Ethan fired once, the bullet catching Hale's shoulder. The man stumbled back but didn't fall. Instead, he gritted his teeth and laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You'll regret that." Before Ethan could advance, the tattooed driver grabbed a metal wrench from the floor and swung. Ethan ducked, the blow grazing his shoulder. Pain flared hot, but he countered with a sharp elbow to the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The taller one lunged again. Ethan fired a warning shot, and he froze. Rain poured through the broken windows, hissing against the heat of gunfire. The room smelled of smoke, wood, and blood. "Shadow, guard," Ethan commanded. The dog stood over the fallen driver, snarling, preventing him from reaching the weapon. Ethan rushed to Lily, cutting the duct tape from her wrists. She whimpered softly as he touched her arm. "You're okay, kid. You're safe now." Her lips trembled. "He said they were going to take me away forever." "Not tonight," Ethan replied, pulling his jacket over her shoulders. Suddenly, Hale lunged again, blood streaking down his sleeve, pulling a hidden pistol from inside his coat. "You should have stayed out of it," he roared, firing. The shot missed Ethan but shattered the glass lamp behind him, plunging the cabin into near darkness. Shadow charged instantly, tackling Hale to the floor. The gun fired again, echoing through the cabin. Ethan dove forward, grabbing the weapon from Hale's grasp. The man struggled weakly, the fight draining from him as Shadow's teeth locked on his coat sleeve, holding firm but controlled, trained restraint. Outside, the faint wail of sirens began to cut through the storm, distant but approaching. Ethan exhaled, tension finally breaking. He cuffed Hale's wrists with zip ties from his pocket, then glanced down at him. "You're done." Hale looked up with that same strange calm. "You don't even know who you've crossed," he whispered. "This doesn't end here." Ethan stood, pulling Lily into his arms, as the first blue lights flickered through the trees. "Maybe not," he said, "but it ends tonight." As he carried Lily towards the doorway, the storm began to ease. The pine branches swayed above them, sighing like the forest itself had been holding its breath. Shadow walked beside him, head low, eyes scanning the clearing. The SUV sat silent, doors hanging open. The nightmare was over. For now, the wail of sirens sliced through the storm like a lifeline. Red and blue lights flared against the wet pines, turning raindrops into a dance of color. Ethan stepped out from the cabin's broken doorway, cradling Lily against his chest. She was trembling but conscious, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. The wind clawed at his coat, and the cold seeped through the soaked fabric, but he barely noticed. The storm had begun to die down. Thunder retreated into the distance, leaving only the whisper of rain and the quiet hum of approaching engines. Shadow trotted beside him, fur drenched, head low but alert, his breath steaming in the chill air. 2 patrol cars slid to a halt on the muddy path, their tires kicking up brown water. Doors slammed, and voices called out through the rain. Ethan recognized one of them. Sergeant Mark Riley, the state trooper from earlier, his face taut with focus. Riley's poncho clung to his tall, wiry frame, and his salt and pepper beard dripped with rain. "Cole," he shouted, sprinting forward. "You all right?" Ethan nodded once. "Girl's safe. The others are inside. 1 wounded." Riley motioned to 2 officers, both young and tense. "Secure the cabin. Watch your corners." They moved quickly, rifles raised. Then, as Riley turned back toward Ethan, a figure stumbled from behind the second cruiser. A woman, breathless, drenched, her hands clutching a gray coat that barely stayed on her shoulders. She froze when she saw the small figure in Ethan's arms. "Lily." Her voice cracked like something breaking inside her. Lily stirred, her head lifting weakly. "Mom?" In an instant, the woman was running, slipping in the mud but not slowing down. When she reached them, she threw her arms around her daughter, pulling her close, crying openly. Her sobs were soft and uneven, the kind that came from deep exhaustion. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving her space. Sarah Bennett was in her early 30s, though the last 3 days had aged her far beyond that. Her light brown hair was soaked and plastered against her pale face. She had the kind of beauty that came not from perfection, but from strength. The hollowed eyes of someone who had stayed awake too long. The trembling lips of a mother who had been praying without rest. Her coat was torn near the sleeve, and there was dried blood along one wrist, evidence of her struggle before losing Lily. But even now, amid the chaos, she carried herself with a quiet resilience. She kissed Lily's forehead again and again, whispering, "I'm here, baby. You're safe now. It's okay." Lily clung tighter. "He said I'd never see you again." Sarah's voice broke. "He was wrong." For a long moment the world seemed to still, just the sound of rain falling softly on leaves, of a mother holding her child after days of fear. Ethan stood nearby, silent, watching the scene unfold with a heaviness in his chest. He'd seen reunions before. Parents embracing children after raids, families saved from disaster. But something about this felt different. Maybe it was the quiet gratitude in Sarah's trembling hands, or the way Lily looked back at him with a faint, fragile smile, eyes still red but alive again. Riley approached, his radio crackling faintly. "Backup's clearing the rest of the area," he said. "1 suspect dead, 1 in custody. The older guy, Hale, he's bleeding but stable. Paramedics are on their way." Ethan gave a curt nod. "He said this wasn't over. Whatever operation he's part of, it's bigger than just the girl." Riley frowned. "We'll dig into that later. Right now you need to let the medics check you. You're bleeding." Ethan looked down. A shallow cut ran across his forearm. He hadn't even noticed it. "I've had worse." Riley half smiled, shaking his head. "You SWAT types never change." As the officers moved around them, securing evidence and escorting the handcuffed Hale toward an ambulance, Sarah turned to Ethan. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met his. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "They told me my little girl was gone, and now—" She stopped, tears rising again. "You don't have to," Ethan replied quietly. "Just take her home." Sarah studied him, as though trying to understand the man standing before her. The scar on his brow, the weary set of his shoulders, the sadness that lingered behind his composure. "You saved us," she said, voice trembling. "Both of us." Ethan's gaze drifted to Shadow, who was sitting nearby, chest rising and falling slowly, eyes still watching the tree line. "Not me," he said. "We did." Lily let go of her mother and walked towards the dog. She was still shivering, but her small steps were steady. She knelt beside Shadow, reaching out a hesitant hand. "You're a hero," she whispered. Shadow leaned forward, pressing his nose gently into her palm. She giggled softly, a fragile sound, but the first real laugh since the nightmare began. She hugged the dog's neck, burying her face in his wet fur. Shadow closed his eyes, a low rumble of contentment in his chest. Ethan turned away slightly, his jaw tightening. The sight was beautiful, but it stirred old memories. Another rescue, years ago. Another child he hadn't been able to save. The ache of failure never left. But tonight something felt lighter. Maybe redemption didn't come in grand victories, but in small ones like this. Riley walked up beside him, arms crossed. "You're not staying for the debrief?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm just passing through." Riley smirked. "You sure? You've got a hell of a report to file." Ethan gave a faint smile. "I don't work for anyone anymore, remember?" The trooper studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. "Then I'll just say thank you, unofficially." Ethan took the handshake, firm and brief. "Keep an eye on Hale. He's the type who doesn't talk unless he's cornered." "Yeah," Riley said grimly. "We'll make sure he finds that corner." As the medics loaded the wounded into the ambulance, Sarah approached once more, holding Lily close. She hesitated, then reached out her hand to Ethan. "If you ever need anything," she said, "anything at all, my door's open." Ethan looked at her, the rain washing mud and blood from his face. "Take care of her," he said. "I will," Sarah whispered. "And thank you for giving me my world back." Ethan nodded once. He watched as she led Lily to the ambulance, the girl still clutching her rabbit and waving through the window. The sirens flared again, casting red and blue light across the pines as the vehicles pulled away. When the forest finally fell quiet, Ethan stood beside Shadow, looking toward the fading lights. The air was damp and cold, but somewhere beneath it, the scent of rain on pine carried a strange peace. He rested a hand on the dog's head. "Let's go, partner," he murmured. "We've got a long road ahead." They walked back toward the truck, the storm now only a memory. The night was still broken, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt that maybe he wasn't. The first light of dawn crept over the ridges, spilling soft gold through the pines. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean and still glistening from the night's violence. Mist curled along the dirt road, weaving between the trees like ghosts reluctant to leave. Ethan stood by his pickup, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, watching the faint smoke rise from the chimney of the ranger's cabin, where Sarah and Lily had spent the night under police protection. He hadn't slept. Men like him rarely did after nights like that. The adrenaline faded, but the noise in his mind lingered. A soft creak came from the porch. Sarah stepped outside, carrying 2 tin mugs that steamed in the cool morning air. She looked different in daylight. Less haunted, though exhaustion still clung to her face like a bruise. Her hair, usually neat, fell in damp strands around her shoulders. She wore a thick sweater borrowed from one of the officers, sleeves too long for her slender arms. Even in the pale light, her eyes glowed with quiet gratitude. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing him one of the mugs. Ethan took it, the warmth seeping into his fingers. "You didn't have to." She smiled faintly. "I know, but I wanted to." Behind her, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was giggling softly as Shadow nudged her with his nose, his big head resting against her knees. The dog's fur was still damp, but he looked content, tail sweeping lazily across the floorboards. Lily had tied one of her hair ribbons around his collar like a medal of honor. Sarah followed Ethan's gaze. She hasn't smiled like that in months, she whispered. Ethan watched in silence. Shadow lifted his head, sensing his attention, and let out a low, happy bark. Lily looked up. "He's my hero," she said proudly, stroking the dog's ears. Ethan managed a small smile. "He thinks the same about you." The door opened again, and Sergeant Mark Riley stepped out, adjusting his hat. In daylight, the lines on his face were clearer, etched deep from years of night shifts, wind, and worry. His uniform was neatly pressed despite the chaos of the previous night. He carried a clipboard under one arm. "Morning," he greeted, voice gravelly. "Paperwork's all wrapped up. Hale's in custody and headed to Cheyenne for interrogation. He hasn't said much, but our tech guys found encrypted files in the cabin. Looks like he was part of something bigger." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Trafficking?" "Possibly," Riley replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Financial and human. The Bureau's taking over from here." He gave Ethan a look halfway between admiration and disbelief. "You know, for a man just passing through, you sure know how to blow open an operation?" Ethan shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Wasn't part of the plan." Riley chuckled dryly. "You ever have one that was?" The exchange made Sarah smile. There was something grounding about their banter, the calm after chaos. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Riley sighed. "Now there's healing, and paperwork, and a very long nap." Sarah laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. Then her expression softened as she looked at Ethan. "And you? What happens to you now?" Ethan stared out toward the misty road stretching into the horizon. "The road keeps going. Always does." She studied him, recognizing the distance in his tone, the kind that came from men who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. "You could stay a while," she said gently. "Lily would like that. So would I." He hesitated. The thought tempted him more than he expected. But then he looked at Shadow, who was watching him with knowing eyes. "I appreciate it," he said finally, "but I'm better at leaving than staying." Sarah's lips parted as if to protest, then closed. She nodded, understanding without liking it. "Then at least take this." She pulled a folded photograph from her coat pocket, one of Lily holding Shadow, taken just minutes earlier by a young officer with a Polaroid. "So you don't forget us." Ethan accepted it carefully, tucking it into his jacket. "Not a chance." Lily ran to him then, her blanket trailing behind like a small cape. "Do you have to go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, kiddo, I do. But you've got your mom now. She's the bravest person in this forest." Lily hugged him tightly. "Will you come back?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe one day. You never know where the road leads." When she finally let go, Shadow stepped closer. Lily wrapped her arms around the dog's neck again. "Take care of him," she whispered to the shepherd. Shadow gave a low woof in reply. Riley clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "We'll handle the rest. Try not to find any more trouble on your way out, all right?" "No promises," Ethan said with a half smile. As he climbed into his pickup, Sarah and Lily stood side by side on the porch, the wind tugging at their hair. The rising sun broke through the fog, painting the wet pines gold. For a moment, Ethan just sat there, taking it in. The rare sight of peace earned the hard way. Then he turned the key. The engine coughed, growled, and came to life. He rolled down the window. "Take care of yourselves," he called out. Sarah's voice carried across the clearing. "You too, Ethan." As the truck began to move, Lily's small hand lifted in a wave. Shadow barked once in farewell, tail thumping. The road curved ahead, lined with tall pines and streaks of sunlight filtering through. Ethan drove slowly, the mist parting before him, the world waking up again. On the seat beside him, Shadow lay quietly, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert. Ethan reached over, patting his side. "We did good, partner." The shepherd gave a content rumble, his tail flicking once. The truck climbed the last hill, and the clearing faded behind them. In the distance, the faint hum of morning life began. Birds calling, wind in the branches, the start of another day. Hours later, as the road stretched endlessly ahead, Ethan caught sight of a small convenience store by a crossroad. Outside, a stack of newspapers sat in a rusted vending box. The headline, half visible through the glass, read, "Former SWAT officer and K-9 partner rescue missing girl. A miracle at Midnight Station." Ethan smiled faintly, shaking his head. "A miracle," he murmured. "Guess they still believe in those." He reached out, scratched Shadow's ear. "Come on, boy. Let's see where this road takes us next." And with that, the truck rolled forward into the sunrise, leaving behind the storm, the mountains, and the ghosts of the night before, heading toward whatever waited beyond the horizon. In the quiet that followed the storm, one truth remained. Miracles don't always arrive in shining light or angelic voices. Sometimes they come disguised as a weary soldier, a loyal dog, a child's courage, or a stranger who decides to stop when others would drive past. What happened that night was more than luck. It was a reminder that God still works through ordinary hands, guiding those who listen to his whisper in the dark. Every act of kindness, every choice to care, ripples outward like light breaking through clouds. And maybe, just maybe, that's how heaven touches earth. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe that goodness still wins. Leave a comment, subscribe, and help spread faith and hope across every corner of this world. May God bless and protect you and your loved ones today and always.